Whoa! Whoa! 2017's Ducktales is a masterclass in applied nostalgia. If you grew up with the cartoons or comics, you'll be treated to secret handshakes for the lore savvy in every episode. More impressive, though, is what happens if you're walking into the show without any background. You'll have no idea it's there. TV writers analyzing 70 years of talking duck cartoons and comics is culturally apt. Scrooge McDuck was created in 1947 by Disney artist Carl Barks. No, that's not the name of some socialist dog persona. Barks started what would become the Ducktales setting. Drawing upon elements from decades worth of these comics, Disney made it into a cartoon in 1987. Extensive backstory is a double-edged sword, having tons of lore making a setting feel rich and real to longtime fans because you know the characters well enough to have context for their behavior and their world, well enough to identify old villains and locations from mere hints. Real life has persistent details, so media feels more real when the all-powerful MacGuffin from the last season is used against the big bad this season, instead of being completely abolished. However, newcomers often feel like they're missing out on a lot of the fun. If you've ever tried to get into a long-running series like Doctor Who or Star Wars, you've run into this before. Minor characters will pop up who the cast recognizes but you've never seen before. Even main characters say or do things that seem strange, since you don't know their full backstories. In short, it's the stuff that longtime fans love that alienates the newbies. Then, we get off to the biggest speed bump of all, when an otherwise cool series has elements that were, in retrospect, mistakes.
And I suspect preys on women because women are more easily and more deeply terrified, generating more sheer horror than the male of the species.
Why is that a mistake instead of just being dated? Because it's nobody's favorite part. Star Trek fans love Spock for his devotion to science and reason, even as passionate emotion tries to overwhelm him. Having an alien science officer break character to dish out some 1960s pseudoscience about female hysteria is a slip-up. It's a moment of lazy scripting by a TV writer on a deadline. That doesn't mean the show as a whole isn't fantastic and progressive, but it makes you cringe when you're trying to get a friend to watch the same show. And simultaneously, when something's been part of the canon for half a century, we worry that dropping parts of the canon can make the whole series feel less real. Having been around since the 40s, DuckTales has accumulated more than a few of those cringe moments. Content warning for old-timey racism. For example, one early villain was an African sorcerer named Fula Zula, who was chief of the Voodoo tribe and wanted revenge on Scrooge for hiring an army of cutthroats to destroy his village and steal his tribal land. This way Scrooge could start a rubber farm, the most colonial thing ever. That left a bad taste in my mouth. And did I mention this was the 1940s? But surely, the 80s version had none of that.
Hey, mister, want your fortune told?
Oh no! General Cluster's last stand.
And here comes City Bull.
Which means we are sitting ducks.
Speak for yourself, darling.
And Doofus, yes sir, I want you to take good care of my darling Weathergale. And don't forget to invite me to the wedding.
Yeah. Well, that was all from one episode. How do you keep the best of the old while making a series appealing to new fans? You reboot. Smartly. In the DuckTales reboot, they have their plane and crash it too. They keep what works, discard what doesn't, and update everything else. And a lot of the times, that's a matter of opinion, so really improving anything is an abstract concept and it becomes a bit of a goose chase after a certain point. Man, oh man. So let's start with Scrooge McDuck. First appearing alongside Donald Duck in 1947, Scrooge started out as a greedy miser, hence the name, who hated everybody and was frequently the story's villain. So he was basically who Flintheart Glomgold is now. In interviews, creator Carl Barks explained that he saw the Duck characters as characterized human beings, using them as send-ups of real-life figures and concepts. Scrooge was a caricature of modern capitalism. In a 2003 interview, Barks explained, wealthy people like the Vanderbilts and Rockefellers are sinful because they have accumulated fortunes by exploiting the poor. I feel that everybody should be able to rise as high as they can or want to, provided they don't kill anybody or actually oppress other people on the way up. By the 80s cartoon, his character had been softened into a wealthy yet still penny-pinching adventurer. He had a strict sense of honor and only believed in money-making fair and square, going to incredible lengths to thwart those who got rich unethically. In the new series, the evolution continues. He's still a comically wealthy cheapskate, but would never stoop to robber baron capitalism. Unlike stumbling into unearned wealth as an oil baron, this Scrooge actually earned his fortune. He achieved this generally by risking his life to uncover lost loot. All wealth is the result of luck, even in cartoons, but the modern Scrooge didn't exploit anybody to get his riches. In his world, it's possible to become a billionaire ethically. It's another fanciful difference from our world, like the show's magic, space travel, or talking ducks. The show also presents Scrooge as a somewhat tragic figure, following in Barks' original social commentary more than the previous cartoon ever did. Voiced by David Tennant, who has made a career of conveying the tragic streak of impossibly old and powerful adventures, Scrooge routinely finds no solace in his vast wealth. He's literally swimming in money and still can't bring himself to leave the house or connect with others, not even his family. The viewer is led to ask, if billionaires aren't happier than workers, what's the point of having billionaires? Disney didn't make these changes on a whim. It wants young people to engage with the show. Those under 40 today are poorer than their parents were, and know it's because rich people exploit. And so we get a late-stage capitalism Scrooge McDuck. Money can't buy him love. In fact, at the start of the show, wealth has bought him decades of depression and isolation. He's also a post-colonialist Scrooge. He might nab long-lost treasure, but he doesn't pollute or rob. No more oil platforms or rubber plantations for Mr. McDuck. One last trait that makes the modern Scrooge likable is he obeys the Bugs Bunny law. An unstoppable trickster is only sympathetic when he's teaching a well-deserved lesson. Scrooge is entirely willing to abide even the most annoying rival, so long as they aren't threatening his family or innocent bystanders. Scrooge is not the only character reworked to be relatable. Who gets stabbed with all the bad luck? Donald Duck has traditionally been the recipient of slapstick misfortune, often to his own fault, to which he reacts with a flurry of furious duck speak, or buccal speech, as it's formally known. Either way, you can't understand a thing he's saying. Apparently, speech impediments are common in cartoon ducks.
This is the last time I work with someone with a speech impediment.
Donald might still have a temper, but he's also shown to care a lot about his nephews. This version of Donald has been parenting long enough that it's now how he defines much of his self-worth. He has given up a career that meant a lot to him and works hard to provide for his nephews instead. Where in his previous incarnations he would try to trick his nephews to punish them, here he's attentive, protective, maybe even overprotective. In general, the show tries to humanize Donald, even letting him talk like a normal person from time to time. In the 80s version of Ducktales, and almost every other appearance, Huey, Louie, and Dewey are completely interchangeable and have sort of a precocious preteen hive mind. The dialogue between the three characters more resembles the internal thoughts of one individual rather than a conversation between several individuals. The only time they were treated as separate entities was the 1996 cartoon Quack Pack. Disney even casted more than one voice actor. Can you believe it? They possess some of the traits we see in the new show, but all scrambled around. They had started to differentiate, even if they were just assorted flavors of chillaxed 90s dude. In the new incarnation of DuckTales, their 90s personalities are developed to the max. The boys frequently disagree or have differing objectives. Ultimately, they have actual personalities at this point. Huey, the red one, is upstanding because he can't handle when plans and rules go out the window. Dewey, the blue one, is adventurous because he's a bit of a glory hound. And Louie, the green one, puts on a cynical facade because he's actually the most sensitive one. So I mean, they're not just grab bags of positive, negative traits either. Rather, their strengths grow from their weaknesses and vice versa. Critically, for the plot, they each admire something different about Scrooge. Huey likes that he's smart, Dewey likes that he's bold, and Louie admires that he's free, which often takes the form of money. Of course, lacking a hive mind does lead to some friction. Just as the dwarves of The Hobbit had to go from comically homogenous to having relatable personalities to transition from page to film, Huey, Dewey, and Louie are now unique characters. For the first time in Disney history, you might actually relate to one of them more than the others. Audiences of 1947 would have taken it as par for the course that the original comics cast was almost entirely male. But 70 years later, we want female characters who actually do something, if not leading. The 80s Ducktales had exactly 2 female main characters, neither very suited to adventure. Miss Beakley has gone from a fussing, fuddy-duddy housekeeper to this setting's James Bond. The Disney XD series gets a lot of comic mileage out of subverting the expectations of what a housekeeping grandmother is supposed to look like. But the show's most incredible rebuild is Webby. No longer is she a minor character who pops in when they need a naive waif to complicate an adventure by doing something girly. Now she's a little more,
If I don't come back, tell my story!
Like the triplets, Webby gets a full, both sides of the coin personality. She's a hyper-competent action girl specifically because she was raised solely by her secret agent grandmother. Depending on the situation, this upbringing leaves her oscillating wildly between capable and inept. She admires Scrooge more than anybody else in his orbit, but is given less thought by him than anyone else in the cast. Rather than being a drag on the story, Webben is often a driving force in the plot. With the occult knowledge of Hermione Granger, the genre savvy of Connie Maheswaran, and the grappling hook of Mabel Pines, she's been almost completely remade from her previous incarnation. She's also adorkable.
Yeah, I'm not really a hugger. Oh yeah, no, me neither. Hugs are like, whatever, or whatever.
And then we come to Launchpad McQuack. Launchpad is exactly the same. He dresses the same, he acts the same, and owing to a spot-on performance by the porcupine from Sing, talks almost exactly the same as the original cartoon. Why didn't Launchpad change? Ain't broke, don't fix it. He was already great. What did change, though, is how the show treats him, the world around him. Next to all these nuanced characters, Launchpad is a reliable source of comic relief, rather than the straight man. The old show never would have done this gag, as an example.
I was just gonna swing over and visit an old girlfriend from these parts. See, she's had some problems with the local crime family.
Yes, fine, whatever. 1 hour! What happened to you?
You know, tourist stuff. Goodbye, Ziggy, wherever you are.
As with the rest of the cast, it isn't necessary to know anything about the previous versions of the characters. In spite of near constant callbacks to previous versions, novice audiences will find the new personalities relatable and reasonable, even for the most unreasonable characters. Talking about Launchpad brings us to how the show teases elements like Darkwing Duck.
Oh, come on! I'm the best at crashing! Wait! Take the wheel!
Let's get dangerous.
Launchpad climbs out on the plane. Gonna start a fight! Wish I could think of a word that would rhyme with bite. Alright!
The show also throws in winks and nods to Gummy Bears and Tailspin, but Darkwing Duck has gotten by far the most development. It's almost certainly a backdoor pilot, a way for the studio to gauge audience fondness for a show before producing it by sneaking it into something that already exists. In the new Ducktales setting, Darkwing Duck is an in-universe TV show, which gives us the 1991 cartoon of Our World the same updates we've discussed here. Really, the point of Ducktales is the most classic aim of all furry literature: to make you reconsider assumptions by casting animals in human roles. From the bird's eye view, we can see our own world better. Just like the series was updated to get with the times back in the 80s, it's been updated again. We might get another revision in 30 years, who knows? I'm more than okay with that. But having a series you love get rebooted or retconned can be scary. But remember that the version you grew up with is still around. Reboots tend to make the original more available, not less. I mean, Disney is, after all, on a quest to make more money than Scrooge if they haven't done it already. As we've talked about in our Robin Hood episode, stories exist to serve the needs of their society. Just as myths and legends are constantly remade time and time again for different eras, we will continue to see Disney characters recast and reshaped to help us keep perspective on our own era. In the case of the rebooted Ducktales, society has started demanding more sophisticated characters and more realistic representation for a variety of characters. More adults watching cartoons, kids demanding better writing, women and minorities getting more of a voice in society. The causes are varied, but the result is better cartoons. Like any technology, animated media advances by building on past work. And if shows like DuckTales are any indication, future's looking bright. I've been your host, Underbite. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Let us know what you think of the new DuckTales, or even the old DuckTales, in the comments below. What's changed? What hasn't? We'd love to find out. Be sure to check out our Patreon, and while you're here, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, comment, do whatever you want to do. Share it with your family, your grandmother. The more the merrier.
Oh, there you are. Good to see you. I took a bullet to the eye the other day. Still standing. I've only eaten sand for 3 days now. And I don't like that I like it now. Just make a bit of peace in these hard post-apocalyptic times. Well, if you signed up to our newsletter, we would have told you all about this long before it happened. Apparently on that newsletter, you can get up-to-date info on the news on Culturally Effed and everything else we get up to, including how to survive an apocalypse. Oh boy. Your support on Patreon will do everything for us, bring us out of these hard times, and bring you into some stronger, brighter light of all things anthropomorphic and furry. Thanks for watching. Run.